Welcome to Concept 1, Introduction to Multiplication. We're going to talk about three different things in this video. The first one is going through the standards that are covered by this concept. The second is going to be important vocabulary that you need to know to support your student. And the third is going to be important how-tos, how to actually do some of the concepts and explain some of the concepts. Let's talk about the standards first. There's three main standards that this concept is going to cover. The first one is 3OA-A1, which is when we interpret products of whole numbers as the total number of objects in a certain number of groups. So for example, you have to be able to describe a context in which a total number of objects can be expressed as a multiplication fact. This involves being able to understand that an array represents a multiplication sentence and then how to apply that and be able to provide multiplication stories using those concepts. The second standard is the A3 standard, which is using multiplication and division to solve word problems in situations involving equal groups, arrays, and measurement quantities. Obviously, we're going to start with multiplication here, and we're going to build that basis of understanding arrays and groups and equal groups throughout the concept of multiplication. And finally, we're talking about the B5 standard, which is the properties of operations. Now, in this concept, we are only going to be covering the commutative property of multiplication. As we move forward, we're going to cover some more. So the commutative property of multiplication is covered through this B5 standard, which means that no matter what order a factor is in, the product stays the same. This allows students to be able to explain how they know their facts forwards and backwards. So it promotes fluency and gives them a strategy to be able to explain and understand. Let's talk about vocabulary first. The first word that your students need to know is array. And it's a total number of objects arranged in rows and columns. It's a visual way of representing multiplication facts. Typically, we use it at the very beginning of multiplication to help students visualize what a fact looks like. It also helps give them an idea of what equal groups and equal number of objects in each group look like. So the example I gave was 2 times 2. In this case, we see that there's 2 rows with 2 objects in each. The second word that you need to be able to explain to your student is repeated addition. And this is the operation that is the very core of multiplication that they should come in from second grade having an understanding of. And it's the operation used when you're adding the same number many times. And the key to this is that it has to be the same number being added over and over again, or else they can't call it repeated addition. So this is where that concept of equality in terms of groups comes from. So if you look at the example, 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 8, we are adding the number 2 to objects 4 times, meaning I have 4 groups of 2 objects, and that means that there's a total of 8. So the how-tos for today are going to be representing related multiplication facts using the commutative property of multiplication, helping your students understand how to use that to explain how they know facts are related. And we're also going to talk about how to build an array to represent a total number of objects. Let's begin with the commutative property. It states that no matter what order factors are placed in a multiplication sentence, as long as the factors remain the same, the product's going to remain the same. So this is true because when we arrange counters or objects into an array and we want to use the commutative property, we don't take any counters out, we don't put any counters in. The only thing we're doing is switching the 2 numbers in the fact to represent rows and groups. So let's take a look at the example. 5 rows of 2 objects, which is on the left-hand side, has the same amount of objects as 2 rows of 5 objects. That one's on the right-hand side. In my classroom, to help really drive this property home, I have students draw an array on a piece of blank paper, and then I have them turn it 90 degrees in either direction. They can see that I have the same exact amount of counters that I started with, only they're in a different position. So instead of having 5 down and 2 across, now they would have 2 down and 5 across. So that helps them understand that those two numbers just kind of switch roles in the multiplication sentence. So in short, it just lets us change the order of the factors in the problem without changing the total. Then we're going to talk about building an array. So the biggest foundational principle of multiplication is the fact that you can multiply when you have equal groups of an object. If the groups are uneven, you can't multiply, you're just adding them together. So multiplication saves a lot of time when students get the hang of it. Instead of adding over and over and over again like they did in second grade, now we're giving them a way to do that operation a lot quicker. And arrays help them build that basis for it. Arrays are meant to be a visual for a multiplication fact, and we have to have them in organized rows and columns. So we usually use counters in the classroom. You can use any object whatsoever. The only thing that's required of an array is that the groups are equal and that the rows and the columns are all organized and neat. So when we're putting together a multiplication fact from an array, we have to think of our rows and we have to think of the objects in each row. Typically, the first number you put in the multiplication sentence is the number representing the rows. So rows are the counters or the objects that we count vertically. They go up and down. So in this picture, we have 5 rows. The objects in each row are counted horizontally, meaning in each row, how many counters do I have? And in this picture, I have 2. So that means that my fact is 5 times 2. I can incorporate the commutative property here by switching the 5 and the 2 and having 2 rows of 5 objects. So thank you so much for being a great support unit to your child at home. It means a lot to the teachers and means a lot to your child. So please, as you move through, have fun and math on.